This is The Secret Library, a podcast about writing and publishing books. I'm Caroline Donahue, a life coach who works with writers, and I'm here to tell you this is your year. It's time to stop waiting and start writing. The Secret Library podcast is brought to you by listeners like you. You can join the Secret Library podcast Patreon and Writers Club at patreon.com/secretlibrary and support the show as well as get bonus materials, solo episodes, and have the opportunity to participate in Q&As and other fun stuff. Again, the address to check that out is patreon.com/secretlibrary. This is episode 141 of the Secret Library podcast. My guest this week is Mike Hembury, who is an Anglo-Berliner originally from Portland, England. He's a writer, musician, photographer, sailor, environmentalist, and guitar nerd in no particular order. He writes a column for The Wild Word, and his first novel, New Clone City, was out from Wild Word Press last year. It was a real treat to talk to Mike because as a fellow Berlin resident and one that's coming to Berlin from outside of the Anglo world, he has quite a few years on me in Berlin. And it was wonderful to look at how this city, as well as being an expat in a different culture and taking that in, influenced his book, New Clone City, which is an amazing ride. It's quite an incredible steampunk, futuristic yet speculative, kind of genre-defying experience in fiction that was a treat to read and even more of a treat to discuss with him. So we had a lot of fun talking about how to bring the political into writing in a natural way that doesn't dominate the book, what it's like to create characters, where they come from, how to build them, and how to write a book without all the boring bits, as he puts it. So I know you're really going to enjoy hearing from Mike. So here we go with Mike Hembury. Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
It's fun to have someone else who is currently in Berlin, but of course we are not in the exact same physical location, but it is fun to bring that into the space. I'm almost always interviewing people who are far, far away geographically, but it's fun to have you on sort of across town.
Yeah, I guess I'm just around the corner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to start with about New Clone City is the fact that you went with a press that's also local to Berlin. And I'm wondering about what that process was like, putting a novel out as an English-speaking writer, writing in English, but publishing with a press located in Germany. And I'm interested in how that came about, and then we can get into the book itself.
Okay, well, that, I guess, is very much to do with my publisher. So that's The Wild Word, and who were, well, I mean, I was writing for them for their online magazine. And so they were very, very keen and very supportive when it came to writing the book. So I sent them some chapters and they were like, yeah, well, finish it, do it, go ahead. And so it was... in a way, I was wondering whether to, maybe go through the whole process of, the agent and finding a bigger publisher, whatever. And in the end, I was just thought, well, no, these guys have been so supportive and really, really just gung-ho from day one that I thought, well, what is against it? I mean, just do it, So that was really, I guess, the kind of the potted version of why the local publisher.
I think that's such a great thing for people to hear, because many people think of publication as like this arduous, difficult, kind of torturous process that is really scary. And to hear someone have an experience where building a relationship with them, getting to know them, and that they were supportive of the work even before it was finished is just something that's helpful for people to know is an available experience to have.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I certainly heard... how can I say, from other writers with different perspectives who were sort of saying, well, it's almost like a big sort of career decision where they were saying, no, they have a different focus and whatever. And I kind of totally respect that. I mean, that's really fine. But I also just, how can I say? It was just so encouraging and such a positive vibe to have that support from more or less the beginning. And I mean, Kuzi and Erin, they were both. How can I say? They believed in me when I wasn't necessarily believing in myself. So that was incredibly positive experience, really.
Definitely. That's wonderful to hear. So let's go back to the beginning. And I would love to hear, because you were writing for them, you've written in other places, but what inspired the beginning of this book, which is, it's an amazing book. It almost defies description. I was like, I'm going to have to get him to describe it, because I would say it's in some ways speculative fiction, in some ways sort of parallel reality, but in some ways just, I don't know. So let's go back to the beginning. And how did the idea come to you, and how do you describe the book?
Oh, okay. That's
3 questions. Sorry, I'm hitting it with you all at once.
That's a really tricky one. Well, the idea. So how did the idea? Well, I guess a thing to know is maybe that I've been here in Berlin for about 30 years, which is longer than I've been anywhere else. And sort of for a while, like 20 years, I was sort of went native, I mean, I was just didn't really have much contact with the English speaking community, and the English speaking community here has changed massively as well. So I think part of the kind of the impetus for me behind the book was a sort of, how can I say, I wanted to write about where I am, but without mentioning the fact that it has anything to do with Germany. How can I mean, that's kind of like, that's not the only thing, but it certainly was a kind of a motivation for me, I think, because how can I say, I'm originally from the UK, and what I often get, even with very sort of young people, is a kind of blinkered sort of vision. Oh, yeah, the Germans. Yeah, we get the Germans, and we get their sort of Prussian values, and we get all this. And I was kind of thinking, I'm a translator also, kind of from way back, and I was thinking, no, you don't really get it at all. I know that sounds sort of very kind of gatekeepery sort of, but that's not my intention. It's more like I have a sort of deep love and affection for this place, I guess, and also for the people here, and my own family here, and my friends here, and I kind of think that. Yeah, I kind of needed to counteract that somehow, I think. So that was a very major part of my motivation, I guess. So what was the rest of your question?
No, I think that's great. And I think, so what was the original idea? And then how do you describe the book when talking to other people? Because it is a book, I can see the desire to defy convention, both in not being reductionistic about the place where it's located. I love the play of words. I had a lot of fun trying to figure out the clever twists on locations. And I was like, okay, I think I know where this one is. But the other one, it made me want to get on the U-Bahn and ride around and look for names that were just subtly tweaked and played with, which was really fun. But I can see the desire to defy convention. So I wonder how you categorize the book, or how you describe the book, or what the influences are for you in writing it.
Okay, well, I guess I'm also a huge sort of cyberpunk fan. One of the people I dedicated the book to was Pat Cadigan, who's a Canadian writer living in England, and who wrote a book called Fools, which just had a massive impact on me in terms of what you could do with that genre. Just how it can mess with your head, kind of thing. And I guess I've always been, for a long time, a bit of a sort of nerd in that, kind of like, like this sort of IT kind of classic thing. So, I mean, I sort of love all that. I mean, the kind of, I don't know, the whole vibe of that early internet. I mean, I just still remember that. That was just unlike anything that had ever happened before. It was just a kind of massive rush. And I think I'm also fascinated with the whole sort of virtual reality thing and what that can do in a sense. And in a way, so I kind of love that space that opens up when people just kind of plunge into a kind of a virtual world which they've created on paper. That's always just a kind of this huge, sort of a rush for me. So I kind of, that was certainly part of the, if you like, the motivation behind the book. And also, I guess it started from a short story, which was very much, I guess, quite sort of grotesque, but sort of almost like a comedy sort of number around a guy who goes to see a doctor, kind of in a virtual world kind of thing. So anyway, so that was that also played a large role.
So it started with Jimmy, in a sense.
Well, yeah, I guess yes. I guess it started with Jimmy. Yeah, but also I think I wanted to bring in. Yeah, not just have kind of one perspective on it. So I did want to bring in a lot of other perspectives. And I mean, a lot of my experience of Berlin has been in almost sort of discrete scenes, if you like, discrete kind of communities in the city. And so that played an enormous role for me as well. So how do these kind of various takes on a place or whatever, how do they interact?
Definitely. I think that's something that was really fascinating to me, was this way in which it's a very large cast and there are many, many threads coming through it and interlocking. And one thing that I loved was that you would see the same incident from several characters' perspectives. There are a couple of a motorcycle accident comes to mind, and some other incidents in there where you'll see it from the perspective of somebody who's inside of the experience. And then in the next section, you'll see it'll touch on somebody seeing it from the outside. And the way that you're able to see it, it made me think of the film Rashomon. So how did you know what those moments were where you'd see it from people? I'm interested in the way that you wrote it, because there were so many threads and so many elements to keep straight, and yet you'd have these moments where they were so neatly sewn together. And I'm wondering how you achieved that balance.
Oh, okay. Well, I think it's interesting that you say that, because to me the plot itself seems sort of fairly straightforward, and I kind of had all these characters flying around, and I thought, well, they've got to meet up somewhere. So it seemed to be kind of quite natural for me to do that. It's interesting that for me that you say that kind of struck you as a major aspect. I mean, it. I think. I don't know. I mean, I think I was in a space at the time, kind of like a headspace, where they were just doing their own thing, more or less. How can I say? I mean, maybe that's maybe sounds a little naive, but what the novel itself was written pretty quickly, so it was more let them get on with it.
So how did you meet them and figure out what they were doing? Did you start, because there was a short story about someone going to a doctor in a virtual world. So that reminds me of the scene or the plot line of Jimmy going to see the doctor. And I mean, he's taking other people to a doctor. Some people get injured and then they end up going. But I'm just interested in how they made themselves I don't know how do we find out about characters? It's like they appear somehow, but then it's very difficult to slow that process down and to figure out where they came from. As we're writing, we have sort of an aha, or did you have the idea of the characters and then just start writing their stories individually?
Well, I don't. Well, there were a couple of kind of figures that emerged. I think. Jimmy was a kind of like an initial sort of spark, and then there was the Doc, who was also kind of like present from quite early on, and Claire, who was, I guess, a kind of kick-ass sort of ecological feminist punk. Sort of, she was there pretty quickly, but I think that these characters sort of emerged. I didn't plan them. How can I say they did? I didn't. I think they emerged kind of fairly autonomously, and I found myself writing like just. Like the first couple of chapters, more or less, as short stories. And I was in a creative writing group at the time, and the feedback was, this is a novel, don't you? And so when I was thinking, okay. And it wasn't like, at that time, I wasn't consciously lining up my characters and saying, well, this is what they're going to do. It was more that they kind of like emerged, and then I thought, okay, they've where are they going? What are they doing? And I think also what was very important to me at the time was I did it as part of NaNoWriMo. So that really got me into a space where I wasn't really agonizing about anything much. It was like I was more just thinking, okay, time to sit down and get on with it. And that was great for me. That was very, very good, because that put me into sort of a work mode with the whole process, rather than this kind of agonizing art mode. You know what I mean? It was
yes, very well.
Yeah. So there was much more about, get on with it. And I think I notice in my own reading that I often read things that are like worthy, and I think, yeah, right, but now I really need something that's going to get me going. So maybe I'll find myself like reading a book or two in the meantime, just to sort of get the juices flowing again. And I find that there are certain authors who kind of like do that for me, that they kind of like just have this sort of snappiness and pace about them that just how can I say that there's like a role model, I think, in a sense that I just think, yeah, okay, these are the kind of books I like to read. So that was, I guess, at the back of my mind.
I think that's so important, because we do have these ideas, or at least, I don't know, some of us do who want to write books. I know I've sort of gotten myself trapped in this periodically, of this sense of not getting on with it, as you say, and agonizing and feeling like we have to write a certain kind of book, or there's a certain kind of book that needs to be written, rather than thinking about, what do I really love reading? What really matters to me? What do I enjoy? What kind of sentences do I enjoy? What kind of characters am I excited about? And how can I spend time with them? Like, writing doesn't have to be like taking vitamins.
No. And I mean, I think I also... I love the beat poets, the Dadaists, the surrealists. I love sort of kind of detective fiction, and as well as kind of cyberpunk, whatever. So I think it's that comes into the book for me. I think those involve like breaks. They involve certain sort of a willingness to say, yeah, okay, narrative is not just, and then this happened, and then this happened. It's like, I mean, if you're doing it in the cinema, you'd cut,
right?
You cut to the scene, cut to a different scene or whatever. And so I love that feeling of like freedom in a sense to experiment. I mean, obviously you've got to kind of like tie things up to a certain degree, but I thought that was quite liberating to me to be in that like flow where you could say, well, okay, yeah, let's just cut out the boring bits. You know, like, I mean, I'm not sure to what extent I succeeded in it, but that was kind of my intention, I guess, you know.
I can actually see all of that. As a great lover of Dada and many things that you talked about, I can see that. And I didn't think of it until you said it, but I can totally see it now. And I agree. It does feel like there's such a momentum in the writing, and there's such a sense of things going forward. This is not a book that it's sort of a slow, careful, little, meandering towards one moment of transformation. Like there's constant transformation and turmoil and things happening and insights and discovery happening for the characters pretty much in every scene. I mean, how was it for you to maintain that pace? It sounds like you thrive on it. I was like, I don't know how you had the energy to keep writing this much happening.
Well, I guess I grew up on comics, you know, and I kind of like, I sort of, I mean, okay, I studied literature, German literature, whatever. I kind of done that, and, right. But I kind of have sort of trashy tastes, and I kind of, I mean, I kind of, I don't like to get bored with if I'm reading something and I kind of thinking, yeah, come on, like that just doesn't do it. So I like for things to move along, and I think that's important when you're writing something, that you have to have that feeling. Yeah, okay, yeah, this is kind of like doing it for me right now. I don't like that feeling of I've got to get from here to there, and so I hate that. Yeah. So I like and I think I'm pretty goldfish-like in that I have a short attention span. I think after a while, I want a chapter that's going to be satisfying to me. So that was quite important, that I kind of thought, okay, this chapter does it, sort of stand, or even this section sort of stands alone in some way. So that was like very important, that it just kind of worked in itself as a piece of writing, that each bit kind of worked. And I kind of thought, well, okay, that's kind of good enough. And they don't have to be all the same, or they can be stylistically quite different. I mean, I like collage, and I think I do a lot of photography, and I used to do a lot of collage as well. And so I guess that's quite a visual thing. I mean, it's, like that sort of visual aspect is quite important for me.
Definitely. I can see that as well. Well, it's weird to say I can see that about a book, which is words on a page, but yet you have this experience in your head while you're reading, which does feel very visual, and did feel very visual in this book as well. I think that brings up an important point, which is that we, when writing a book, there's so much more time spent writing it than there is for the reader reading it. No matter how much they love it and no matter how carefully they read it, it's just not possible for someone, unless they read like one word an hour or something, to take as much time reading a book as we spend writing it. And I think that if we don't allow ourselves to be fascinated and engaged and excited with scenes as we're writing them, then it's less likely that the reader will feel that way. It's
sure. I mean, what you're saying there, I mean, I think of somebody like Neil Stevenson, who was one of my favorite authors. And I mean, his Baroque trilogy, I think I must have read it about 3 times now. And I kind of like always surprise myself when I do that. I mean, I don't often reread books, but kind of rereading that is like a massive work. And it's just different every time for me. And that has that is also something which has so many different layers, or you can't really sort of fit it into a stylistic sort of category. And that's I love that. So I guess that's something that I would aspire to.
Definitely. I think one thing that I wanted to ask you about that was present in and is a challenge, I think, to bring in is that you were able to write about sort of the political sphere and people having political takes and engaging with the world politically without writing a nonfiction book on like, this is how to be a civically responsible human being, but living in sort of a tumultuous period of time as we do now. But I mean, I guess every period is ultimately somehow tumultuous, but this one feels particularly so. How did you bring the political into it? Was it something that you thought about specifically, or was it just that these characters happen to be politically minded people?
I think that, well, in a way, it's kind of unavoidable. I mean, I didn't really want to do something which is like, oh, I have to represent the kind of like the political spectrum in some way. I mean, that wasn't at all what it was about for me. You know, it's just like I thought, well, okay, these characters, where would they be? What would what are they? What could their opinions be? What could their feelings be at this particular time? I mean, it is a very slipstream universe in the book, but at the same time, I think that people are sort of engaged more or less, I guess, in the world. And, just from the people that I know, that they would have their own specific takes on things. So I don't think, how can I say, I think it was important that their politics should proceed from their feelings in a way,
Yeah, that it was who they were and it was just them living their lives rather than something they were doing as sort of a prosthetic on the front of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that the sort of art form, I mean, movements like the Beat Poets or the Dadaists, that informed a lot of what they were doing, but it didn't necessarily mean that, that they were sort of preachy.
Right.
I don't like that. I don't really like that. And I think if you're going to do that, then you could write a pamphlet, I don't, I mean, I don't think people want to be in that sort of genre. They don't want to be sort of preached at.
No.
I mean, but it's nice. I think it's nice when I'm reading a book, I think it's nice to feel sort of at home. Or if you kind of recognize the writer in a book and you think, okay, yeah, I mean, I sort of read Margaret Atwood and I kind of love what she her sort of like environmental fiction. And you just think, yeah, wow, that's just great. It's sort of, and she's very playful at the same time, I think. And I think that's, in a sense, it's sort of reassuring. I mean, it's obviously about, your own worldview, the author's worldview, but, you don't have to buy it. You don't have to read it if you don't like it, whatever, But I think it's good to have a sense of where the characters are and where they're coming from.
I just think it's interesting to bring it in because I think a lot of people fear incorporating that subject, or they feel like they don't want to alienate people or they don't want to set them off. But to bring the characters' viewpoints in, I think that really gave them depth and you got to know them better for having it included.
I don't know. I mean, I guess, I mean, I think for me, it does sort of boil down to where people are and where they're coming from. If whatever, there's somebody in the book, I mean, she's a lesbian working for the state. How does that work? How does that work out in terms of, or working undercover for the state? How does that work out in terms of her politics? How can she square that with herself? And I think those things are quite interesting. I remember when I was living in London, I mean, this was about, like 35 years ago, I mean, and I met a young black woman on the street and she was handing out leaflets for the young conservatives. And I was sort of stunned that I was just thought, well, how does that work? How can, like this is kind of like one of the most, or at that time, a very right-wing grouping, in British politics. And I kind of thought, well, how does that work then for you? And I just thought, well, okay, don't be naive. It will work. It works for her somehow. Otherwise she wouldn't be doing it. She must be able to square it somehow. And I think it's kind of like, it's interesting to look at, to sort of like confront in a way your own cliches. You think, well, people are like, people have a certain whatever upbringing or background or ethnicity or whatever that that their politics should be like this, and it doesn't work like that at all. That's a kind of a quite an interesting aspect of human nature, I guess.
I think that's what's so rewarding about writing books, is that you get to sort of step inside of what would it mean, or if someone was in this situation and they handled this way, what would that look like? And that it's sort of an exercise in empathy, or an exercise in figuring out how you square it, as you said. I think that's a great way to think about it.
I guess I think we're living now at a time that things are pretty fucked up, and so I think that the even sort of quite, how can you say, fairly sort of normal demands become quite radical. Just like saying, let's have some clean air or some clean water,
right?
And that's where we are. I think you sort of say, well, let's not destroy the planet or whatever. That seems to be absurdly simple as a demand or as a position, and but apparently not. Apparently that's something that is difficult to say these days.
Yes.
So I think the book is more sort of political with a small p. It's not, it's not.
Oh yeah.
I don't think it's, yeah. I don't know. I don't think that's kind of like so in your face. I don't think.
No, and I think that it's more that it was part of the whole. And when I think back to what you said at the beginning, that you were in some ways thinking about how people were being really reductionistic about Berlin and about Germany, and saying, oh, I get it. We get how they are. And being able to push back a little bit and say, well, maybe it's not quite that simple. I think that there's something really important about using writing and using literature to push back on topics that people can get really reductionistic about and say, well, maybe it's just not quite that simple. I think having lived in both Berlin and Berkeley, which is another city that carries a lot of that, that kind of, I don't know, it defies convention, and yet people really love to categorize it. I think that there are places that kind of carry responsibility in a way, like they want to think in different ways, and they want to have different ways of pushing forward. And in the case of Berlin, there's a lot of history laid on top of that.
Well, enormous amount of history. I think, I first came here in the 80s, and it was full of draft dodgers, of course. It was, like everybody who didn't want to go to the army, skipped off to Berlin, to West Berlin at least, and that was, so the whole place was full of all these, draft dodging layabouts, squatters and whatever. It's pretty freaky and pretty great, and I think that in a sense that still very much informs a lot of what the place is about, that this kind of like quite sort of anarchic undercurrent is very, very much present, and people sort of people are like, I guess this is quite sort of Berlin specific in a sense, but people say, oh yeah, and they're so rude, you go here and they're so rude and they don't get customer service, and I think, well, just go back home, whatever. Want customer service, that's and I think that a lot of it is, if this was New York, especially for English speakers, if it was New York, people would would be able to handle it. I mean, I think New York has an the same kind of rap as Berlin, in the sense that it's when people say, oh, they're so rude or whatever. And you're like, but it's just like people are sort of speaking the same language. But if you're like, you come here as an Anglo, you get into a sort of like a victim status. There's only 6 bad things to me and I don't know what to say. And so I just think, you don't, but even like the rest of Germany is like that with Berlin. They just think the Berliners are just out there.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's in some ways the perfect place to have, a book that defies convention and that is breaking out and looking at things in a different way and pulling from Dada and pulling from the bee poets and pulling from all of these influences who were looking at convention and sort of saying, no, I don't think I'll have that. I think I'll have something else. I think I'll try something else. And I love how each of these characters is at sort of a critical point in their lives and deciding how they want to handle it themselves and not really taking the easy way out and saying, oh yeah, I'll do the simple thing. I'll do the really obvious choice. None of them does that, which is really fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's just my life. Maybe that's just my view of life. I don't know. People sort of tend to not always do the easiest things. Like I guess they just, people are sort of bloody minded and just don't necessarily do things that they think other people think is the right. Is the right thing for them to do. You could say, well, to people, I don't know, why are they in that relationship or whatever, and but you're just looking at it from the outside. It's just, who are you to judge kind of thing. So people they make their own minds up in the most obscure ways, I think.
Yeah, it's fun to experience. I mean, I think that's one of the really enjoyable things about reading the book is to watch people make up their own minds, really clearly thinking about it. They're all thoughtful. They're all saying, okay, let me take a minute. I'm going to reflect on this and I'm going to do what's right for me. And seeing them take a challenging perspective, take a risk and face things head on. I think that was something that really stood out for me that I enjoyed about it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, like I say, I sort of, in a way, I just sort of wound the figures up a little bit and they just sort of did their thing, I guess. Yeah.
That's fun to watch. Mm. So how is it now that it's out in the world? How does it feel to have wound them up, written through it, gotten through, and now it's out there? How has it been setting them free?
Scary, I guess, in a way. I mean, I remember when I first started writing fiction and workshopping it. And I remember that being probably one of the scariest experiences that I'd ever had. This sort of sense of, you sort of create something and then show it to people and then, they tear it to shreds or they don't or whatever, or they like it or they don't. And I must say, I never knew you could really have this much fun with literature. In the sense that I've been doing readings in all over the place, and I've sort of found out that I really enjoy doing that. And so, yeah, that's been very, very interesting for me, and also people's feedback has been very interesting. So I guess in a word, so it's been great, been really, really good. I think what I feel now is that kind of having started work on like a sequel, that I find the world at large to be in such a desperate place that it's kind of like makes it sort of slightly difficult to focus on fiction. I find it difficult to read fiction at the moment, that I'm kind of reading a lot of nonfiction, and so that is a kind of I guess it's a sort of question for me, is that, it's like how do you get enough detachment in a way, almost to be able to sort of get back into that space. I mean, I'm also writing a lot of poetry, and that's kind of at the moment a little bit easier for me because it's in a sense you kind of focus on one thing, and that's you can kind of bore down into that without getting into a sort of greater vistas and more complex scenarios. So I think at the moment, I know, but I'm going to have to sort of deal with that. I think deal with that. That in a sense, yeah. What do we do now? I mean, if you define yourself in some way as a writer, you got to write, I guess. You got. I mean, that's your part. That's part of your response to the world. It has to be that. So you got to deal with it somehow, and I think that is it's a challenge to all of us right now. I mean, I'm just talking specifically about kind of the ecological crisis really at the moment. So I think that is certainly a challenge, and I think if you're like in well, not just in America, in the UK, but Western Europe, whatever. A lot of these countries are really facing major problems in terms of democracy. So again, this is something which really, I think people are slightly shell-shocked right now, and sort of adjusting to it. A friend of mine, he was on Twitter recently, and he was sort of saying something like, am I the only one to be completely, what was the word? Like just sort of emotionally exhausted by just the sort of the news that we're getting right now, and I think anybody who can kind of go beyond that to do something creative and to do something positive, they have my total admiration, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I mean, I think it's important to figure out how you can relate to writing in a way that feels useful and in a way that feels like it contributes, and also in a way that you can just continue doing it, because in times of difficulty, whether they're personal or at large, it can be difficult to create, and figuring out how that works, I think, is maybe one of the most important things a writer can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think there's like a balance, isn't it? I mean, I think writing is obviously quite a solitary pursuit, and how much are you sort of withdrawing and being solitary and doing your own thing, and how much are you sort of whatever, engaging or soaking it up or just being in the world. This is something everybody has to decide that for themselves, really.
Definitely. Well, I feel like we could go on for another episode on this topic, but I'm grateful you stepped out of your solitude to talk to us today so that we could learn more about the process of the book. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Secret Library podcast. The show is produced by me, Caroline Donahue, and Frederick Barry McWilliams Jr., my tireless audio engineer. To get show notes for this episode and all other episodes, please visit secretlibrarypodcast.com. To get updates, literary love, and notification when new episodes are posted, sign up there for Footnotes, my newsletter. And to learn about life coaching with me to work on building your writing life, visit carolinedonahue.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Gold stars to everybody who leaves a rating and review on iTunes. We're so grateful. Until next time, happy reading.